Welcome to Wiki History. Today, we journey back to ancient Greece, to a narrow mountain pass where courage met overwhelming odds, the legendary Battle of Thermopylae. Join us as we uncover the strategic brilliance, the epic last stand, and the enduring legacy of Leonidas I and his 300 Spartans. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Wiki History for more incredible stories from the past. Now, let's delve into one of history's most iconic conflicts. The city-states of Athens and Eretria had aided the unsuccessful Ionian revolt against the Persian Empire of Darius I, from 499 to 494 BC. The Persian Empire, still young, was prone to revolts, and Darius, a usurper, had spent considerable time extinguishing rebellions. The Ionian revolt threatened his empire's integrity, prompting Darius to vow punishment, especially for the Athenians. He also saw an opportunity to expand into ancient Greece. A preliminary expedition under Mardonius in 492 BC secured lands approaching Greece, reconquered Thrace, and forced Macedon to become a client kingdom of Persia. Darius sent emissaries to all the Greek city-states in 491 BC, asking for a gift of earth and water as tokens of their submission. Most Greek cities obliged, but in Athens, the ambassadors were executed by throwing them in a pit. In Sparta, they were simply thrown down a well, effectively putting Sparta at war. Darius then launched an amphibious expeditionary force in 490 BC, which attacked Naxos, besieged and destroyed Eretria. Finally, it moved to attack Athens, landing at the Bay of Marathon. There, it was met by a heavily outnumbered Athenian army. At the ensuing Battle of Marathon, the Athenians won a remarkable victory, forcing the Persian withdrawal to Asia. At this, Darius began raising a huge new army to subjugate Greece. However, in 486 BC, his Egyptian province revolted, indefinitely postponing any Greek expedition. Darius died while preparing to march on Egypt, and the throne of Persia passed to his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes crushed the Egyptian revolt and quickly restarted preparations for the invasion of Greece. This was no mere expedition, but a full-scale invasion supported by long-term planning, stockpiling, and conscription. Xerxes directed that the Hellespont be bridged to allow his army to cross to Europe, and that a canal be dug across the isthmus of Mount Athos. These were both feats of exceptional ambition, beyond any other contemporary state. The Athenians had been preparing for war with the Persians since the mid-480s BC. In 482 BC, under the strategic guidance of the Athenian politician Themistocles, the decision was taken to build a massive fleet of triremes to resist the Persians. However, the Athenians lacked the manpower to fight on both land and sea, requiring reinforcements from other Greek city-states. In 481 BC, Xerxes sent ambassadors around Greece requesting earth and water, but very deliberately omitting Athens and Sparta. Support thus began to coalesce around these two leading cities. A congress met at Corinth in late autumn of 481 BC, and a confederate alliance of Greek city-states was formed. This alliance had the power to send envoys to request assistance and dispatch troops from member states to defensive points after joint consultation. This was remarkable for the disjointed and chaotic Greek world, especially since many supposed allies were still technically at war with each other. The Congress met again in the spring of 480 BC. A Thessalian delegation suggested that the Greeks could muster in the narrow vale of Tempe, on the borders of Thessaly, to block Xerxes' advance. 10,000 hoplites were dispatched, but warned by Alexander I of Macedon that the vale could be bypassed and Xerxes' army was overwhelming, the Greeks retreated. Shortly afterwards, they received news that Xerxes had crossed the Hellespont. Themistocles then suggested a second strategy, blocking Xerxes' army at the very narrow pass of Thermopylae, which could easily be blocked by Greek hoplites, and simultaneously blocking the Persian navy at the Straits of Artemisium. Congress adopted this dual-pronged strategy. In case of Persian breakthrough, Peloponnesian cities made fallback plans to defend the Isthmus of Corinth, while Athenian women and children would evacuate en masse to the Peloponnesian city of Troezen. The Persian army made slow progress through Thrace and Macedon. News of their imminent approach reached Greece in August, thanks to a Greek spy. At this time, the Spartans were celebrating the festival of Carnia, during which military activity was forbidden by law. It was also the time of the Olympic Games and the Olympic truce, making it doubly sacrilegious for the whole Spartan army to march to war. However, the ephors decided the urgency justified an advance expedition to block the pass, under King Leonidas I. Leonidas took with him the 300 men of the royal bodyguard, the Hippes, intending to gather other Greek soldiers along the way and await the arrival of the main Spartan army. The renowned account of the Battle of Thermopylae, as documented by Herodotus, includes a significant consultation with the oracle at Delphi. It is said that the oracle delivered a prophetic message to the Spartans, foretelling the impending conflict. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide spaces. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus' sons, or, if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles, for not the strength of lions or of bulls shall hold him. Strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus, and will not be checked till one of these two he has consumed. Herodotus tells us that Leonidas, in line with the prophecy, was convinced he was going to certain death, since his forces were not adequate for a victory, and so he selected only Spartans with living sons. The Spartan force was reinforced en route to Thermopylae by contingents from various cities, and numbered more than 7,000 by the time it arrived at the pass. Leonidas chose to camp at and defend the middle gate, the narrowest part of the pass of Thermopylae, where the Phocians had built a defensive wall some time before. News also reached Leonidas from the nearby city of Trachis that there was a mountain track that could be used to outflank the pass of Thermopylae. Leonidas stationed 1,000 Phocians on the heights to prevent such a maneuver. Finally, in mid-August, the Persian army was sighted across the Malian Gulf approaching Thermopylae. With their arrival, the Greeks held a council of war. Some Peloponnesians suggested withdrawal, but Leonidas calmed the panic and agreed to defend Thermopylae. According to Plutarch, when a soldier complained that, because of the arrows of the barbarians it is impossible to see the sun, Leonidas replied, "Won't it be nice, then, if we shall have shade in which to fight them?" Xerxes sent a Persian emissary to negotiate with Leonidas, offering freedom and land. When Leonidas refused, the ambassador carried a written message from Xerxes, asking him to hand over your arms. Leonidas' famous response was Malon Labe, meaning come and take them. With the emissary returning empty-handed, battle became inevitable. Xerxes delayed for 4 days, waiting for the Greeks to disperse, before sending troops to attack them. On the 5th day after the Persian arrival at Thermopylae, Xerxes finally resolved to attack the Greeks. First, he ordered 5,000 archers to shoot a barrage of arrows, but they were ineffective, deflected by Greek wooden shields and bronze helmets. After that, Xerxes sent a force of 10,000 Medes and Scythians. The Persians launched a frontal assault in waves of around 10,000 men on the Greek position. The Greeks fought in front of the Phocian wall, at the narrowest part of the pass, using their standard phalanx formation. Their overlapping shields and layered spear points were highly effective. The weaker shields and shorter weapons of the Persians prevented them from effectively engaging the Greek hoplites. Units were rotated to prevent fatigue. The Greeks killed so many Medes that Xerxes reportedly stood up 3 times from the seat from which he was watching the battle. According to Ctesias, the first wave was cut to ribbons, with only 2 or 3 Spartans killed in return. According to Herodotus and Diodorus, Xerxes, having taken the measure of the enemy, threw his best troops into a second assault the same day. The Immortals, an elite corps of 10,000 men. However, the Immortals fared no better than the Medes, failing to make any headway against the Greeks. The Spartans reportedly used a tactic of feigning retreat, then turning and engaging the enemy troops when they pursued. On the second day, Xerxes again sent in the infantry to attack the pass, supposing his few enemies were now disabled by wounds and could no longer resist. However, the Persians had no more success on the second day than on the first. Xerxes at last stopped the assault and withdrew to his camp, totally perplexed. Later that day, as Xerxes pondered his next move, he received a windfall. A Trachinian named Ephialtes informed him of a mountain path around Thermopylae and offered to guide the Persian army. Ephialtes was motivated by the desire for a reward. For this act, his name received a lasting stigma, coming to mean nightmare in Greek and symbolizing the archetypal traitor. Herodotus reports that Xerxes sent his commander Hydarnes that evening, with men under his command, to encircle the Greeks via the path. Diodorus states Hydarnes had a force of 20,000 for the mission. The path led from east of the Persian camp along the ridge of Mount Anapeia, behind the cliffs that flanked the pass, branching towards Phocis and the Malian Gulf. At daybreak on the third day, the Phocians guarding the path above Thermopylae became aware of the outflanking Persian column by the rustling of oak leaves. Herodotus says they jumped up, greatly amazed. Hydarnes, equally surprised, feared they were Spartans but was informed by Ephialtes they were not. The Phocians retreated to a nearby hill, but the Persians, not wishing to be delayed, merely shot a volley of arrows before bypassing them to continue their encirclement. Learning from a runner that the Phocians had not held the path, Leonidas called a council of war at dawn. Some of the Greeks argued for withdrawal, but Leonidas resolved to stay at the pass with the Spartans. Upon discovering that his army had been encircled, Leonidas told his allies that they could leave if they wanted to. While many of the Greeks took him up on his offer and fled, around 2,000 soldiers stayed behind to fight and die. Knowing that the end was near, the Greeks marched into the open field and met the Persians head-on. Many of the Greek contingents then either chose to withdraw or were ordered to leave by Leonidas. The contingent of 700 Thespians, led by their general Demophilus, refused to leave and committed themselves to the fight. Also present were the 400 Thebans and probably the Helots who had accompanied the Spartans. Leonidas' actions have been the subject of much discussion. It is commonly stated that the Spartans were obeying the laws of Sparta by not retreating. It has also been proposed that Leonidas, recalling the words of the oracle, was committed to sacrificing his life to save Sparta. One commonly accepted theory is that Leonidas chose to form a rearguard so that the other Greek contingents could get away. If all the troops had retreated, the open ground beyond the pass would have allowed the Persian cavalry to run the Greeks down. If they had all remained at the pass, they would have been encircled and eventually killed. By covering the retreat and continuing to block the pass, Leonidas could save more than 3,000 men who would be able to fight again. The Thebans have also been the subject of discussion. Herodotus suggests they were brought as hostages, but Plutarch argued they were loyalists who objected to Persian domination, staying because they could not return to Thebes if the Persians conquered Boeotia. The Thespians, resolved not to submit to Xerxes, faced the destruction of their city if the Persians took Boeotia. However, the remainder of Thespiae was successfully evacuated before the Persians arrived. It seems the Thespians volunteered to remain as a simple act of self-sacrifice, all the more amazing since their contingent represented every single hoplite their city could muster. This self-sacrificial trait was particularly Thespian, seen on at least 2 other occasions in later history, where a Thespian force would commit itself to a fight to the death. At dawn, Xerxes made libations, pausing to allow the immortals sufficient time to descend the mountain, then began his advance. A Persian force of 10,000 men, comprising light infantry and cavalry, charged at the front of the Greek formation. The Greeks sallied forth from the wall to meet the Persians in the wider part of the pass, attempting to slaughter as many as they could. They fought with spears until every spear was shattered, then switched to short swords. In this struggle, Herodotus states that two of Xerxes' brothers fell, Abrachams and Hyperanths. Leonidas also died in the assault, shot down by Persian archers, and the two sides fought fiercely over his body, with the Greeks taking possession. As the immortals approached, the Greeks withdrew and took a stand on a hill behind the wall. The Thebans moved away from their companions, and with hands upraised, advanced toward the barbarians, but a few were slain before their surrender was accepted. King Xerxes later had the Theban prisoners branded with the royal mark. Of the remaining defenders, Herodotus says they defended themselves to the last, those who still had swords using them, and the others resisting with their hands and teeth. Tearing down part of the wall, Xerxes ordered the hill surrounded, and the Persians rained down arrows until every last Greek was dead. In 1939, archaeologist Spiridion Marinatos, excavating at Thermopylae, found large numbers of Persian bronze arrowheads on Kolonos Hill, which changed the identification of the hill on which the Greeks were thought to have died from a smaller one nearer the wall. After the Persians' departure, the Greeks collected their dead and buried them on the hill. A full 40 years after the battle, Leonidas' bones were returned to Sparta, where he was buried again with full honors. Funeral games were held every year in his memory. With Thermopylae now open to the Persian army, the continuation of the blockade at Artemisium by the Greek fleet became irrelevant. The simultaneous naval battle of Artemisium had been a tactical stalemate, and the Greek navy was able to retreat in good order to the Saronic Gulf, where it helped to ferry the remaining Athenian citizens to the island of Salamis. Following Thermopylae, the Persian army proceeded to sack and burn Plataea and Thespiae, before marching on the now evacuated city of Athens and accomplishing its destruction. Meanwhile, the Greeks, mostly Peloponnesians, prepared to defend the Isthmus of Corinth, demolishing the road and building a wall. Themistocles persuaded the Greeks to seek a decisive victory against the Persian fleet. Luring the Persian navy into the Straits of Salamis, the Greek fleet destroyed much of the Persian fleet in the Battle of Salamis, which essentially ended the threat to the Peloponnese. Fearing the Greeks might attack the bridges across the Hellespont and trap his army in Europe, Xerxes now retreated with much of the Persian army back to Asia, though nearly all of them died of starvation and disease on the return voyage. He left a hand-picked force, under Mardonius, to complete the conquest the following year. However, under pressure from the Athenians, the Peloponnesians eventually agreed to try to force Mardonius to battle, and they marched on Attica. Mardonius retreated to Boeotia to lure the Greeks into open terrain, and the two sides eventually met near the city of Plataea. At the Battle of Plataea, the Greek army won a decisive victory, destroying much of the Persian army and ending the invasion of Greece. Meanwhile, at the near-simultaneous naval battle of Mycale, they also destroyed much of the remaining Persian fleet, thereby reducing the threat of further invasions. Thermopylae is one of the most famous battles in European ancient history, repeatedly referenced in ancient, recent, and contemporary culture. In Western culture, it is the Greeks who are lauded for their performance. However, within the context of the Persian invasion, Thermopylae was undoubtedly a defeat for the Greeks. The Greek position, despite being massively outnumbered, was nearly impregnable. If the position had been held longer, the Persians might have had to retreat for lack of food and water. Thus, forcing the pass was strategically a Persian victory, but the successful retreat of the bulk of Greek troops was also a victory. The battle itself had shown that even when heavily outnumbered, the Greeks could put up an effective fight against the Persians, and the defeat at Thermopylae had turned Leonidas and the men under his command into martyrs. That boosted the morale of all Greek soldiers in the Second Persian invasion. It is sometimes stated that Thermopylae was a Pyrrhic victory for the Persians, meaning the victor was as damaged as the defeated. However, Herodotus does not suggest this. This idea ignores that Persians would conquer most of Greece afterward and were still fighting a year later. Alternatively, some argue the last stand was a successful delaying action for the Greek navy to prepare for Salamis. However, compared to the probable 1 month between Thermopylae and Salamis, the time bought was negligible. This also neglects that a Greek navy was fighting at Artemisium, incurring losses. George Cockwell suggests the gap between Thermopylae and Salamis was caused by Xerxes systematically reducing Greek opposition, not Thermopylae itself. Far from labeling it a Pyrrhic victory, modern academic treatises emphasize Xerxes' success in breaching the formidable Greek position and conquering most of Greece. Cockwell states, "He was successful on both land and sea, and the great invasion began with a brilliant success." Xerxes had every reason to congratulate himself, while Lazenby describes the Greek defeat as disastrous. The fame of Thermopylae is principally derived not from its effect on the outcome of the war, but for the inspirational example it set. Thermopylae is famous because of the heroism of the doomed rearguard, who, despite facing certain death, remained at the pass. Ever since, the events of Thermopylae have been the source of effusive praise from many sources. A second reason is the example it set of free men, fighting for their country and their freedom. Contemporary Greeks saw Thermopylae as a critical moral and cultural lesson. A small, free people had willingly outfought huge numbers of imperial subjects who advanced under the lash. The Western idea that soldiers decide where and how to fight was contrasted against the Eastern notion of despotism and monarchy, with freedom proving the stronger idea. While this paradigm can be a sweeping overgeneralization, many commentators have used Thermopylae to illustrate this point. Militarily, although not decisive in the context of the Persian invasion, Thermopylae is significant for the first 2 days of fighting. The defender's performance is used as an example of the advantages of training, equipment, and good use of terrain as force multipliers.